Watch this.
Libraries have always been about opening up the world to readers. Well, with Idaho's libraries facing unfounded claims of obscenity and indoctrinating books being pushed on kids, a library from far, far away is opening up its collection to Gem State students. Want to read an actual book? Well, no need to check out a collection from across the country. There's a place where families can go to find their next great read, and you may not even have to leave your neighborhood to get there. Idaho is making its case to keep its triggered abortion ban in place and enforceable by next week. We're getting a glimpse of what the state plans to argue in court. House Bill 666 during the last legislative session brought a lot of attention to Idaho's libraries concerning the content available to kids. Allegedly books pornographic in nature, inappropriate for Idaho students to read, that kind of stuff. We detailed this conversation happening across the state, but mostly focusing on the Nampa School District. There, the school board permanently removed a collection of books, 22 of them, that dealt with topics like being a part of the LGBTQ community. As soon as tonight, there is another conversation on this topic in Meridian and their library system. We're going to have more on that in just a moment. But Idaho, we're not alone in this situation of critical conversations about removing or banning books from libraries. Other states and communities are seeing similar conversations taking place. Well, there's a library system that has been seen this nationwide conversation. They decided they wanted to get involved and promote the free exchange of ideas, which is, after all, what libraries are about. Joe Paris spoke with the chief librarian at the Brooklyn, New York Public Library.
2,000 miles away from Idaho, there's a group working to create more access to controversial books. Books that continue to be at the center of community conversations across our state.
We have 3 libraries in New York City. We have the Brooklyn Public Library that covers just the borough of Brooklyn, all 2.7 million of us here in Brooklyn.
Nick Higgins is the chief librarian for the Brooklyn Public Library in New York, and they serve a New York community that has more people than the entire state of Idaho. The team at the Brooklyn Library is not just concerned, though, about their community, but also readers across the country who are seeing books banned from local libraries because of controversial content. So they created a program to help a demographic who they believe books are vital to, young adults.
This is an intellectual freedom to read initiative by the Brooklyn Public Library. We've been paying attention to a lot of the book challenges and bans that have been taking place, particularly over the last year, in many places across the country. We don't necessarily experience a whole lot of that here in Brooklyn, but we know that there are library patrons and library staff who are facing these, and we wanted to figure out a way to step in and help, particularly for young people who are seeing some books in their library collections that may represent them, but they're being taken off the shelves.
The Brooklyn Public Library is offering a free e-library card to any person aged 13 to 21 across the United States so they can access their large collection of 500,000 digital books and resources. And yes, controversial books being banned and discussed here in Idaho are available for Idaho young adults to access.
What more can we do to actually help out a young person in a community that might not have those responsible adults or those resources to push back against, people who might be a lot more vocal, let's say, or aggressive in promoting a particular ideology that goes against, maybe everything that young person really feels to be true to themselves.
So why is the Brooklyn Library doing this? Higgins says it comes back to what a community library is, regardless of location.
It is a public library represents all of us in a pluralistic society with, we exist with other people, with other ideas, with, other viewpoints and perspectives. And that's what makes a healthy democracy, not shutting down access to those points of view or silencing voices that we don't agree with, but expanding access to those voices, having conversations about ideas that we agree with and ideas that we don't agree with.
Over 4,000 e-cards have been distributed to young adults across the country, including here in Idaho. One Idahoan wrote to the library in Brooklyn about their concerns about one political lens ruling out valuable books. It may be a simple concept, but Higgins explains that removing content that young adults are looking to connect with, especially minority experiences, it sends a powerful message about the community's view of those minority communities.
It really puts everything into context. There are kids out there who have nowhere else to turn, and they're looking for any help that they can get from wherever they can find it. I mean, it's hard enough to be a teenager, but it becomes a lot harder when you feel like your entire community is trying to tell you that your identity doesn't matter.
And if you're wanting to learn more about this program, you can go to the Brooklyn Library's website. We'll have a link on this article when it's uploaded later this evening with some more insight on the program itself. But Brian, it creates a whole conversation about access to books. If a book's not available in a physical library, or in a time where children, even young kids, can access devices and they can get access to different types of content through places like the Brooklyn Library. So it also comes back to the conversation of parental control and making sure you're having a conversation with your children about what they're accessing and what they're reading. And really, it's not just in a vacuum. When a child has an experience and they read something in a book, it doesn't just sit there in the pages. It's always valuable to talk about it at home.
So with kids from Idaho, I assume, getting involved with this and reaching out and getting some books through the Brooklyn Library and stuff. What about, people here in the Gem State who are like, you're invading in our space. This is not up to you. Don't come into our territory. Are they seeing any of that?
Yeah, the Brooklyn Library is getting some pushback from places across the country, not just Idaho. Some comments, stay out of our backyard. But for the most part, Mr. Higgins, who we heard from in the story, he says they haven't gotten too much flack because there's not a lot other people can do about it.
And knowing that anything is available right here, through Amazon, through whatever, you can find pretty much any book at any time. You don't have to actually have a library card, but this just makes it easier.
Yeah, so it's also important to have conversations about the content that your children are reading and what it means in reality.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. So the latest library, as we mentioned before, in the crosshairs of those claiming indoctrination and inappropriate books in the kids section, that would be the Meridian Public Library. And tonight they're hosting their regularly scheduled Board of Trustees meeting, and that usually is about as eventful as, well, a library board meeting. However, tonight's meeting is when the conservative activist group, the Idaho Liberty Dogs, and a few people affiliated with that group, this is the night they have chosen to show up and demand the library be defunded. At least that's the threat if the library doesn't remove several books from its shelves. And it's a list put out by the Liberty Dogs a few weeks ago, claiming they are pushing pornography onto children. It's the same things we've been hearing since the last legislative session. When we spoke with the library last week, they told us they have a very specific policy on approving books, as do most public libraries. And should someone find a book they don't think is appropriate, well, just bring it up to them. They're going to reevaluate it and see if it fits their criteria. And it may not agree with what you're saying, but it'll at least go through the process. And that includes providing content for underrepresented groups, being accurate. That's part of the criteria. Also, having an actual demand from community members. Those are all things that they consider when it comes to what books they put on their shelves. Tonight, that board will be discussing and approving their proposed budget for the next fiscal year, which is why they kind of jumped in on this, talking about a budget. There's also an item on the agenda that allows for public comments, which is where I assume some of this stuff is going to be taking place. Meeting starts at 7 o'clock. It's at the Cherry Lane branch on Cherry Lane in Meridian, and it is open to the public. You could also watch it happen online. But that does bring up the question, where should we focus our worries about what is influencing our kids? Joe kind of touched on it just a little bit ago. But it's not the libraries. It's not the books in the libraries. We learn about the world through pictures and words of other people and their experiences. That's what's in the libraries. These books that have raised people's concerns aren't even in the kids section. We checked. You don't want your kids reading Captain Underpants? That's fine. That's your prerogative as a parent. I don't want my 13-year-old overloading on sugar? Who should be responsible for my kid walking into Albertsons and buying a big bag of Skittles? Worried about indoctrination? It's not the libraries. Anyone who is transgender didn't decide to be transgender because of a book they read in a library. In fact, they didn't decide to be anything. That's just who they are. Much like when a straight person decided to be straight. If there was anything influencing a young person coming out and identifying as LGBTQ, it's usually because they found support from family and friends to be who they really are. A new study, by the way, just came out, published in the American Academy of Pediatrics just 2 weeks ago, showed kids who identify as transgender, well, that isn't happening because of social contagion. That's the theory of behaviors and attitudes easily spread through a group of people. In other words, people don't become transgender by the same mob mentality of starting a wave at a football game or storming the Capitol. That's not how it works. In fact, that same study showed the number of kids identifying as transgender actually went down from 2017 to 2019. It went down over a 2-year period. So are you worried about your kids and who's grooming our kids? It's not the libraries. Let me bring this to you. You've seen the headlines about the rampant sexual abuses in both the Catholic Church and the LDS Church, right? It's nothing new. It's been going on for decades. Meanwhile, up north in Moscow, home of Christ Church, which is a Reformed evangelical church that hopes to turn the entire town of Moscow Christian. There's a former deacon of that church who next week, according to the Lewiston Tribune, is going to plead guilty to child pornography charges. He apparently had child porn on his phone and shared it in messaging groups. So who has the greatest influence on our kids? Their friends, sure. Their family, of course. And we do, as parents. It's not the libraries. Now, speaking of that, more access to books is a good thing. Public libraries, bookstores, great places to grab a new book. Actually hold it in your hand, right? Another option that continues to grow in popularity. This morning, we made a short drive to the Boise Bench, where one of the very first free little libraries was installed nearly 10 years ago. These days, it's more popular than ever.
We saw lots of kids walking by every day in the morning and again in the afternoon and in the evenings with their parents and their families on bike rides. So we thought this would be the perfect corner. This is a very popular little free library. And as an avid reader and a writer, I convinced my husband that our corner spot here right near the elementary school would be a perfect spot for something like that. And we found this doghouse on Craigslist that a woman had built for her small poodle. But these little shelves inside that have this purple shag carpet she built for her dog. The dog didn't love it as a doghouse, but we love it as a library. We made the bottom shelf because it was the most accessible to small people, kids' books, and the top shelf we try to keep like adult novels. We go through a lot of books, and the idea behind the little free library, it says right here, is take a book and return a book. The same people who take books often bring them back, so they'll either bring back the same ones or old ones that they've already read a million times in their own collection. As a parent, you're always looking for more things to read. And it's also just such a fun community spot for neighbors. We'll often see multiple neighbors here at the same time, and they're just like sitting down chatting and talking about their favorite books and what they love about the library. We've had people leave gifts inside, you know, like candy at Halloween, little notes, little presents for little homemade bookmarks for neighborhood kids to take. It is so beloved. It has become an icon. There's been like vintage cookbooks in here and textbooks that we've been looking for and like, you know, brand new novels that we haven't bought yet at the, you know, bookstore. The elementary school often makes field trips here. Every year the teachers will come and the kids will bring a book to trade and get a new book, and they'll sit down here under our trees, and I'll tell them the story about the little free library. And stories are meant to be shared, and in particular, I feel like we miss so much now, like holding that paper copy in your hands. It's such a different experience, I think.
It is a different experience. And that unique little library, well, it's not the only one, as you know, probably riding around the Greenbelt, you've seen them in your neighborhood possibly. There are dozens of them around the Treasure Valley. As of today, there are more than 150,000 of them across the world. More than 70 million books shared every single year with these free little libraries. Take a book, leave a book. You can find a list of all those free little libraries in your area. We have an interactive map where you can do that. Just go to the ktvb.com. We have a link that is in this story. By the way, Amy told us one of the coolest books she found in her little library. She kind of mentioned it there. A cookbook, a 1940s cookbook, complete with handwritten notes and even the oil stains. Something she says she still uses today. It's a perfect illustration of federal government overreach based on a very specific interpretation of the law. That's the argument the state of Idaho is making as it tries to argue against stopping the enforcement of its abortion trigger law. A little more than 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against Idaho because of its near total abortion ban. That should the U.S. Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade, well, it would go into effect 30 days later. Well, that trigger law was passed in 2020, and lo and behold, this June, that's exactly what the Supreme Court did. They overturned Roe v. Wade. So Idaho's ban on abortion, with exceptions only in cases of rape, incest, or where the life of the mother is threatened, well, that's set to go live a week from tomorrow. It'll be August 25th. But with that lawsuit, the DOJ wants to have that law put on pause while it works its way through the court, while the lawsuit works its way through the court. And there's a hearing to decide that scheduled for Monday, which is 3 days before it's supposed to become law. The Biden administration isn't alone in fighting Idaho's trigger law, by the way. 20 states, the American College of Emergency Physicians, and other medical groups have filed friend of the court briefs in the lawsuit, which is basically a legal way to say, yeah, what they said, or retweet. The DOJ's reason for the injunction is obvious. Why rush into something, why enforce something that could be deemed unconstitutional eventually? Let's just wait and see is kind of where they're standing. So here's why they believe the trigger law is illegal.
Idaho's law would make it a criminal offense for doctors to provide the emergency medical treatment that federal law requires. Although the Idaho law provides an exception to prevent the death of a pregnant woman, it includes no exception for cases in which the abortion is necessary to prevent serious jeopardy to the woman's health.
It's that last bit, the distinction of death or seriously jeopardizing health. That's the backbone of the lawsuit for the feds. EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, specifically requires any hospital that receives Medicare funding, well, their emergency department has to help a patient regardless of their ability to pay. And they have to be treated and stabilized. And that's where Idaho is pointing to say the trigger law doesn't violate that. This is kind of how they play it out in words here. The patient, legal words, so I'm going to kind of sum it up for you. The patient is stabilized within the limits of the capabilities of the staff and facilities of the hospital. That's what they're trying to say. And being stabilized, that emergency department could then transfer that patient to another hospital. The hospital, that's how they kind of get around this. Should they not want to perform an abortion, they could just transfer that patient. Yesterday, in the argument against the injunction filed with the District Court of Idaho, the state basically said EMTALA's scope is narrow, too narrow, and has nothing to do with an abortion clinic. It begins only when a person comes to the emergency department and ends when that person is stabilized. Idaho also claims its trigger law is not interfering with those EMTALA agreements, but the state is simply exercising its police power to regulate abortion, much like it would regulate anything else it considers harmful to its people through laws passed by representatives of those people. And by threatening federal funds, the federal government is threatening Idaho's sovereignty in how it regulates abortion, a power that was just granted by the highest court in the land for the first time in nearly 50 years. Judge B. Lynn Windmill will hear those arguments in person at the federal courthouse Monday morning.
What a beautiful sky there. The high temperature today so far, 102. Now at 4 o'clock we hit 102 and then it went down. It's been 102 for the last half hour. It started about 10 minutes before 5. So there's the 102. Average is 91. Interesting thing here about the average is that the averages are starting to drop even though the temperature is not. However, the averages are something that just kind of shows us that as we head toward falls, the averages will start coming down. For instance, the average for the first part of September is 85 degrees. So next week, most of our temperatures are the mid 90s, so we'll still be a little bit above the average. But if we continue going with that into September, we'll be into some 80s, likely within the first week or so of September. Record high, 102. So we've tied the record there, as you can see. But there's something else to talk about on that. This is a 102 in Boise. Mountain Home had that. 101 for the high in Ontario. Still 91 degrees, which is pretty nice for the high temperature in Twin Falls. So this is where we're at. 2022, this summer, we've had 20 days of temperatures of 100 or above. You can see in 2003, that's the record. We've tied that record. Okay, now, can we get above that? Not that we're looking for it, but there is a possibility even with tomorrow's high. As you look here at our satellite and radar, I just want to point out that we do have some moisture that's working up from Nevada, but it's working up to our west here into the Central Mountains. We're watching that closely. But as we get more toward the end of the week, that could produce some isolated thunderstorms in the valley, and the clouds could bring the temperature down just a little bit. So tomorrow, there's 100. That could be 21 days. Friday, 95, Saturday, 96. You see how the temperatures come down because of the clouds and that moisture that we have to the south. As you get into Sunday, 96, and next week, now the average I was showing you is right around 90, so we're just a little bit above that, but we're kind of getting away from the 100s, but we're still somewhere there in the low to the mid 90s.
A little trouble with the big board tonight, technical difficulties, so I'm just going to read some of the text messages sent in today. This one about Idaho's trigger law, which is set to go into effect next Thursday. Does trigger mean that parents have no rights to terminate a child that has Down syndrome or other serious conditions that amniocentesis would show? That should be the parent's right as well, not the state's. And yeah, it wouldn't include that. Rape, incest, or if the life of the mother is threatened. Those are the only exceptions in Idaho's rules or laws when it comes to abortion. About the libraries and books being pushed off the shelves because people don't agree with them. Thank you so much for talking about people trying to get books banned from the public library. You're absolutely right. Parents need to know what their children are reading. People need to realize that kids and teens have full access to way more than they realize on the internet. Way to go, Brooklyn Public Library. Thanks for giving Idaho's young adult population a valuable resource that has been taken away from them by the far right in Idaho. Mr. Holmes, I want to thank you for the program you had tonight. It means a lot to me and my granddaughter. She is LGBTQ, and she came out to me recently, and I think the message that you sent tonight was very loud and clear. I just wanted to thank you, John in Caldwell. Thank you very much, John, for saying so. I really appreciate that. And it is something. If we want to be independent Idaho and everybody come as you are, that's kind of how it has to be, right? We'll see you back here tomorrow.